about my equipment that I chose. This Chouinard Mega Mid tent can be adjusted to any possible height. This video is supposed to use during my travels in the Arctic as a kayak paddler. This is a Chouinard Mega Mid.
Today the winds have finally died here at Barrow, Alaska, which is 71 degrees north. We've had the previous day winds at 50 miles an hour and temperature in the 30s. This morning it is just below freezing. This is to show you how nice and warm it is here this morning. That's snow.
I had sewn extra flaps to extend the coverage of this tent on the ground print. It is a floorless tent. Barrow, Alaska is absolutely flat. There is no protection.
We had snowfall last night. The temperature is maybe about 30, 31, 32.
The only safety for my Klepper Arius 1 was to haul it up into this ditch.
This is my Klepper the morning after some frost.
I tied it with some tent stakes into the ditch. My only refuge from the violent windstorms Barrow experiences was to hunker down in a ditch. This Chouinard Mega Mid tent can be adjusted to any possible height.
This is an example of the effects of ice melting out from under a layer of peat.
This was my first and only time I ever saw an ice lens melting out, and this was special for me to see in Barrow, Alaska. Now, in 1992, I am going to Upernavik, Greenland. Okay, I'm finally ready to disembark from Upernavik. And this is the boat. As you can see, it's finally packed. I am paddling that same Arius 1 Klepper. I am wearing a Ruka vinyl dry suit, which served me very well. The ice sheet on the edge of the shore was very convenient for me to just simply slide my Klepper up. It's after a day of paddling. When you arrive at a place like this, it makes all the effort and the problems and the expense of visiting the Arctic something that is worthwhile. In preparation for my trip, because Greenland is notorious, especially the west coast, for having a lot of ore bodies, compass cannot be used reliably, I purchased GPS. This is the readout for where I am at this time. It is the chart I purchased here in Greenland is more accurate because it's 1 to 80,000, whereas what I had purchased was 1 to 250,000. And my solar panel is functioning just fine. Otherwise, my video camera, which I'm using at this moment, would not be functioning. I made a waterproof rollover seal bag for my solar panel to keep it from getting any salt water on it. I bought the fabric from Seattle Fabrics. The output of the solar panel was 12 volts, so what I had to do was recharge simultaneously two 6-volt video camera batteries. My kayak is sitting on a natural rock ramp, and there were many of these in Upernavik, which was a big reason why I chose to come and paddle in Upernavik. I have brought a sail along with me. It's their Klepper drift sail, and a jib which I made is 1/3 the normal size they offer. It hasn't been windy enough to sail, but it's always nice to have that option available. This is the view from within my tent, looking straight out at Uummannaq Mountain, which I passed by yesterday afternoon. I don't have any mosquito netting in this tent at this time because in this area there were very few mosquitoes. And as you can see, conditions are very nice here. I took a picture of this iceberg about an hour ago. It certainly has changed. It looks like it's very quietly disintegrated while I was busy elsewhere. This area has a very beautiful bottom, and right in the center is a sea urchin. Too far down for me to gather. Because the rocks are loaded with a white feldspar, it's very easy to see what is down there.
Oh boy, do I ever love sea urchins. I would scoop them up on my Wenatchee paddle, smash them open and eat the uni. Wow, that was delicious. While gliding along, I happened to come across this ore body, which Frederica de Laguna had mentioned, that affects your compass.
This little island I'm going by has an ore body there that looks like it's pretty solid iron. Do wonders for a compass.
Here I am paddling back through Tortuga Passage, and it is absolutely dead flat calm. My compass showed no change in barometric pressure, and this turned out to be quite a surprise later on.
The fjord is about half a mile wide. Coming up in nice close view is Umanak Mountain. And we're maybe about a mile from that. And this will give you a feeling for the conditions here. Winds of less than 5 knots.
This looks so innocent, and about a half an hour later, a few miles of paddling, it turned into a raging zoo. Clouds were tumbling down between Umanak Mountain and the other island toward me, and suddenly I was hit with a blast of wind that attempted to rip the paddle right out of my hand. I tied my paddle off to my bow line as quickly as possible, because the worst thing in the world that could happen to me would be to lose my paddle. Then I started paddling toward this shallow bay. I was extremely lucky to happen to be right near this shallow bay where I could easily come in for a landing and get my kayak up on the beach. Most of this passage is vertical everywhere, just as you see in this photograph. I pulled in and hopped right out of my cockpit and dragged my boat up as far as I could get it beyond the reach of the waves. I dove into my cockpit and yanked out all of my dry bags, put them on the beach, and then dragged my boat up as high as I could get it beyond the reach of the breaking waves. I tied it bow and stern off to the rocks with one of my 50-foot throw lines, loaded everything into my carrying bags, and hiked everything up to flat ground above the waves. Here is the carefully chosen floorless tent, which could be adjusted to any height to defend me against the wind, and one of my many shoulder bags that I had designed specifically to load up and be able to easily carry the contents of my kayak up to my campsite. As you can see how this tent is slatting madly in the wind, I was able to crawl out under the wall of the tent on any side. I was able to cook inside of my tent with my Svea 123 gasoline stove. In the next few scenes, I am narrating from the shelter of my tent while I am cooking. That's what you are hearing. This is some very violent weather.
That is coming through this area at the moment. water on the side coming through.
There's something very tenuous. You just can't take things for granted. You really have to wait and be sure that the weather is doing what you want it to do at the time. You cannot just go out there and fight the weather and think you're going to get away with it. This is the kind of weather that will really knock you right off.
Now you want to see a downdraft? Just watch this. See, the air is coming from the clouds and it's darkening the water on the opposite side. And in front of me, it's pretty calm. The air is just tumbling over that mountain. And as it's going by, it's coming down and it's hitting the water on the other side. That's why it's dark and the wind is on the other side there. That's probably what you may call a katabatic situation there. Cold air replacing warm air. The temperature has dropped down about 10 degrees or more, and atmospheric pressure is at 1004. It was at 1001 at the beginning of the storm. And this morning was 1008. Hello, this is Gail Ferris, your narrator, and I'm going to take you on a trip. Today is a lovely day in July. I have just arrived at Upernavik, and I am now loading my kayak. These are the conditions out here, which are quite nice for the moment. I have been held up a couple days by the weather, so that I am arriving 5 days later than I had expected to arrive. So now I'm getting ready to go on my trip. Here you can see all of my apparatus I'm trying to put in the boat. It will be easy to do, actually, once I just figure out where I initially want everything to go. Here, as I am paddling down into Laxafjord, the water is first turquoise, and then it is gradually turning more and more powdery white. The tide is receding, so I'm paddling close to these rocks because otherwise I would have to work against the tide, and it makes a lot of unnecessary effort.
I learned this trick in whitewater paddling. When you want to go upstream, you paddle as close to the edge of shore to catch the shore eddies that will bring you back upstream. I'm catching the shore eddies. I'm showing you a close-up of these rocks as I am gliding by this magnificent granite. Not only am I gliding by, but I'm also catching the wind shadow, as you can see.
The salinity is dropping. Just never know what you're going to see when you're visiting places like this. In my kayak. Over here, this rock dome. We have these clouds up here that are giving us about 10 to 15 knots of wind coming sort of out of the north. So here and there you wind up getting really pushed through the little narrow passages with with a nice free ride on the waves. The water is surprisingly chalky.
Going paddling down into warm fjords. And boy, is that ever so true.
Well, this morning we are in the far reaches of the Laxafjord. And this area is a microclimate. It's much warmer than the outside. This morning we have quite a big population of mosquitoes. So I'm having breakfast outside to make life a little more comfortable because the interior of my tent seems to have a few visitors inside. It's a little annoying to have to deal with so many of these little guys.
This shows my suspended tent liner made of 1.4 ounce ripstock nylon. This ripstock tent liner allowed my breath to pass through and condense on the tent itself. Thus, it would stay off of me.
So returning to the outside, we're having the coffee first.
You might think this is rather odd, but I really do like a cup of Italian coffee made this way every morning.
And then we're having our assorted goodies, which is ham and eggs, oatmeal, and Tang. And in the thermos bottle is lunch for later. All the food on this trip has been prepared during the winter months by either dehydration or freeze drying. And then it was ground to powder in a blender. And it fits in little pockets very conveniently. The solar battery regenerator over here is working. It's charging up batteries.
I am now at Orbit the Forest, and you can see, boy, is there ever a little rock flower.
I have arrived at this point, and I'm standing next to a tree that's about 2 meters.
It's a picture of myself in my Ruka vinyl dry suit, and it was really hot down there. All of the distance I paddled out of the fjord, the wind was in my face the entire way.
I left after I took a few salient photographs because it was just too hot.
As I paddled out of the fjord, the wind was in my face the entire way, about 10 to 15 knots.
This was the denser, colder air replacing the lighter, warm air down in the fjords.
It was a gruesome ordeal, and I just kept paddling until I got farther out away from that heat. Paddling back out of the fjord, I was paddling against the wind.
Supposedly the wind slacks off during the wee hours of the morning, but not here. This is as dark as it gets. There is no night.
The sun makes its dark moments by ducking behind mountains, but it doesn't actually set until mid-August in this area. The fjord I paddled hugging the walls, trying to escape the wind and the current. Both were against me. I paddled across, and then I found this quiet bay on the opposite side.
I brought my kayak up the beach to this position, which I think is sufficiently high.
I cooked with an MSR multi-fuel stove. It did not run on anything other than hydrocarbon fuel, so you couldn't use alcohol.
The stove is just too noisy. I was also worried about what if this gasoline or kerosene leaks out in the bottom of my klepper and undoes the glue. For food,
I duplicated my normal diet.
All the food on this trip has been prepared by either dehydration or freeze drying. And then it was ground to powder in a blender. And it fits in little pockets very conveniently. People often ask, well, what do you wear up here when you're paddling in Greenland? Well, I wear my winter clothing that I wear in New England. But beneath my dry suit, sometimes I'll use fewer layers. But still, the problem of going for a swim in this cold water, especially someone who, like myself, is alone, I don't think it's a good idea to take that chance. And so I rely on wearing this dry suit.
at this time I didn't have booties on my dry suit, so I would be paddling with wet, cold feet. But that was the way it was then. I also always wore a medium weight wool sweater underneath and 2 layers of lightweight polyethylene underwear, which worked out just fine. I also wore a hood and a scarf. I had pogies that were attached directly to my paddle. My choice of hood eventually wound up being a balaclava designed for snowmobiling, which I could cover my lips with.
Now, today I have had the interesting experience of using two entirely different paddles. I grew tired of using the large white blade.
The Warner-Fur Wenatchee whitewater paddle, which develops a tremendous amount of thrust, very important to have. I push straight out from my back at chin height at the same rhythm continually. This paddling technique I learned from Bart Hathaway, but the maintenance of the same rhythm, 1-1000, 2-1000, 3-1000, made a huge difference in being able to paddle for miles and miles endlessly.
When conditions are extremely rough, I really prefer a large bladed paddle. The size of this paddle blade gives me the kind of power that I need to generate to get the boat where I want it. In cross section here, which is one of the interesting parts of paddling, and that is the design of paddle go to make being on the water an interesting experience. And then in less demanding conditions, this wing paddle acts entirely differently and has a smaller surface area. This is a view of the same two paddles end on. You can see the drastic difference from one to the other. I switched over to a wing paddle, completely different type of paddle.
This flight paddle develops only enough thrust to propel the boat downwind. Otherwise, you wind up wasting a lot of energy not going anywhere. I can only do low braces with this paddle. Never can I do a high brace.
For foot gear, I've been using these Gore-Tex oversocks and these booties which have felt soles. The reason why I like to wear felt sole boots on expeditions is when you put your foot down on a slimy rock, it'll usually stay there.
This is especially important when you're standing on submerged, jagged rocks. You don't want to slip in between the rocks and get your foot caught in there and then get pushed around by the waves.
I always try to be as delicate as possible with launching the boat and getting into it while it is floating. And that automatically means you're going to have to step on some slimy rocks. Inside of the Gore-Tex booties, I wear the polyethylene socks. They're
Now
reasonably
I always
comfortable,
wear
and if
dry
they get wet,
suit
it
with
doesn't really
booties
matter.
attached directly.
There's
And
enough
that
margin
was
of
advice
warmth
from
with
Ken
this
Fink
combination.
from
The
Walpole, Maine.
polyethylene socks
I'm
and
much
the
more comfortable
Gore-Tex
with dry feet.
little booties and these neoprene boots that I don't mind having my feet wet under these conditions. I have noticed in New England paddling during the winter that when it gets down to 20 degrees and lower, you really have to have dry feet. Today I discovered the hard way, after having raised a bunch of blisters in the last few days, the immense value of happening to carry with you a pair of leather palm gloves. In 2003, I discovered that paddling with feathered paddles was really not a good idea when you're paddling 20 miles in a day. It simply abrades the skin right off of your hands. So on a long
And plus 25
downwind
knots
trip,
of wind, the only thing you're going
paddling
to
with
wind up doing
unfeathered
is
paddles,
paddling
I discovered
in
was
place.
much
I know,
wiser
I've done it. The only thing
long
you can do
distance
is hope your
paddling.
rudder is down all
I found
the way.
that even paddling into
turn the
very
boat
heavy wind,
around
it didn't
and
make
just
much
go
of any
downwind.
difference whether the paddles were feathered or unfeathered, unless conditions were really ridiculous. In 25 knots of wind with gusts, I would tie the pedal to the boat and hunker down and just slug it out until I could get out. One of my favorite items for all purpose is a pack towel. This is the handiest thing going. You can just do everything with it, including bail your boat to the point of dryness.
With this particular fabric, I can do things like wash my hair and dry it, because this fabric sucks water out of hair and out of other fabrics. When I wash my clothes, I wring them out in this towel to get as much water out of the clothing as I can. This is the only way I can get fabrics to dry quickly as possible in the Arctic.
It's a non-woven rayon fabric. Sitting on a Thermarest pad, which you're probably familiar with.
I modified my kayak seat by inserting my Thermarest pad partially inflated, and this bought me many hours of much more comfortable paddling.
In my boat, you can use one of these Thermarest pads. I had devised an idea for auxiliary flotation in the boat by placing one of these with some air in it inside of a dry bag and then attaching it to the side of the boat as a deployable float.
This expedition weight nylon dry bag, polyurethane coated, has a perfectly functioning rollover seal that works at any temperature. Vinyl dry bags such as the one in the left side of this picture do not form a waterproof seal, especially in cold temperatures. This is the type of dry bag I used.
And you notice it has two grommets at the bottom. The sides are stitched closed as well as heat sealed. And it's long enough to take the Thermarest pad. Top, when it's rolled over and clipped, is perfectly dry. So that makes a little buoyancy aid for an emergency boat problem. Also for water, I found these REI water bags. Hold water just fine, and you should always carry one with you because you never know when you are out going from one place to another whether you're necessarily going to find good usable water. In Barrow, Alaska, I was completely dependent on carrying water for quite a few miles with me. I was shocked to find out, although the topographic maps up there indicated loads of water, it was very stagnant, poor quality water.
In the late summer, in 2003, I bought a long-haul Mark I, which was an even better design than the Klepper Aries 1 that I had been paddling since 1989.
The cushion on the bottom allows you to put air in it, and the seat back is foam, so that you're absolutely comfortable once you get everything adjusted in place to camp. I wrestled my boat up as high as I was able to get it. The tide had peaked out. I always carry a couple of 50-foot throw lines with me, so I tied it off. But what wound up happening in the wee hours of the morning was that the boat was precariously stranded between rocks. This was a nasty thing to do to a brand new boat. But one thing for sure, it's a very well-built boat, and it survived completely unscathed. Many icebergs you can see. So I always had to be aware of where and what is going on before I set off. There's some very rough footage taken by my Mavica camera off the deck of my kayak. This is one of the very few icebergs that ever makes it down into Laxafjord, just drifting around the mid-Laxafjord in this calm area where I've come numerous times and camped. If my tent looks a little weird, it's because it had a bad day. All that was left of it was the inner liner of ripstock nylon, and on the outside I put a couple of solar blankets. The tent sort of died of old age. It used to look like this.
This Chenard Megamid tent can be adjusted to any possible height.